All right, everyone. It's time to have a bit more of a serious discussion. The gameplay in the background is not important. It's pretty bad, actually. I just have it up there so that you have something to watch. But this will be pretty much entirely unscripted. And that is, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we've seen that will be coming with Edge of Fate and kind of how I'm feeling about it. As an intro note, please keep in mind that everything that I'm talking about here is from the perspective of a PvP main. I actually think a lot of the changes that they've talked about coming will probably end up being a good thing overall for PvE. Obviously, there will be some things that are completely broken upon release, both in the sense of things that don't work at first, as well as things that are completely overpowered. We know how all that goes. But I've been saying for quite some time that I think Destiny PvE would benefit greatly if Bungie kind of moved it into more of an MMO style of sandbox, and that seems to be kind of what they're doing with a lot of these changes in Edge of Fate. The problem for me is that I have been completely disconnected from PvE pretty much ever since Final Shape dropped. That's not to say that Final Shape was a bad DLC, because obviously it wasn't. It's just that everything that came after it, I honestly just didn't really care that much about. And even before that, pretty much everything in between, like day one Root of Nightmares up until Pantheon, the only things I cared about during that whole time period in PvE was day one Ron and Pantheon, and everything in between that, it was kind of like, I don't really care. So I've been completely disconnected from D2's PvE for quite some time now, and quite frankly, I've found a PvE fix in other games where I just enjoy their PvE more, so I just don't care about Destiny's PvE anymore at all. PvE for me these days is just there as something to give me PvP toys, and if a PvE activity does not have something that I can take into PvP, I'm probably not playing it. So keep that in mind as we get into this discussion. I am talking about this as a PvP main. I do not care about PvE. So just, please remember that before you start leaving comments about PvE or whatever. Now, getting into Edge of Fate, and I'm not going to go into tons of detail about, every little thing that we've seen, every little sneak peek, all the new armor systems and weapon systems. I'm not going to get into a ton of that purely because, a lot of this is old news by now. We know it's coming. I'm not going to rehash on all of that. However, for me personally, I'm not feeling optimistic. Really at all. I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that I haven't uploaded regularly in quite some time, and the reason for that is just because, Destiny's PvP right now is in such an awful state that I just haven't wanted to play. So I've been playing other games, and funnily enough, I actually, I picked up Battlefield 2042 when it was on sale recently, and started playing that, and man, I had totally forgotten what it felt like to play a shooter that was built for PvP. And even with 2042's many problems, it's still a much better and more rewarding and, quite frankly, more fun PvP experience than the Crucible is right now. And quite frankly, for me, jumping back into a PvP shooter that isn't, Crucible and Destiny, in a lot of ways was kind of a wake-up call. And it kind of accentuated to me how bad Destiny's PvP has become, not just by Destiny standards, but especially by just first-person shooter standards. Like, one thing that I noticed, just as an example here, is that with things like, special ammo versus, primary weapons, as well as things like, having your radar always being up and thus neutering your game sense, as well as in games like Battlefield, not constantly having access to just completely broken abilities. Destiny 2 has actually made me a worse overall first-person shooter player. I've gotten better at Destiny, but as a result, I've actually gotten worse at playing other first-person shooters. And as we've learned more about stuff that's coming with Edge of Fate, and when I say I'm not optimistic about what's coming in Edge of Fate, I don't just mean from the perspective of, oh yeah, the sandbox is going to get worse and all that, the normal conversations. I mean, I'm not optimistic that PvP won't go the way of something like Gambit in like less than a year. And so I'm bringing all this up for a couple of reasons. One, I'm just going to give my kind of thoughts on a lot of this stuff that's coming in a more generalized way. Again, I'm not going to go over every little thing, but just very specific things that I think will have a significant impact on PvP. And two, because unless Bungie starts really jumping on PvP and trying to make it a, quite frankly, just a playable experience, I think there's a good chance that when Battlefield 6 drops, assuming it's at least decent, I may very well just drop Destiny 2 completely. Because I don't care about the PvE anymore. And PvP has been getting worse pretty much every single season, pretty much since I would say Beyond Light dropped. I mean, we've had like a few brief up periods here and there, the 30th anniversary and the brief time that we had Checkmate. But outside of that, PvP has just gotten consistently worse. Like every few months, there's been something that has just made PvP worse in some way. So the first thing that I'm going to mention is one of the things, and I think this could honestly in a lot of ways be the biggest contributor to PvP, quite frankly, quite possibly dying. And it's something that I feel like I never really see anyone talk about, but that is the just barrier to entry of Destiny 2 PvP. And when I talk about that, I don't mean like, the usual learning curves that come from picking up, a new shooter, right? I'm talking about just time investment, meaning the amount of time it requires to have a competitive loadout inside of PvP. And the reason I'm bringing this up is aside from PvP losing players pretty consistently over the last few years, one thing that I don't really feel like I ever see people talk about is that PvP doesn't ever pull in really any new players. And this is kind of a problem because if you want a PvP mode in a first-person shooter to thrive, you have to attract people who like PvP first-person shooters, which means that you can't just be trying to get Destiny players into PvP. You have to be trying to attract people from outside of Destiny, right? Because the reality is that, like, obviously the PvP population has just declined drastically. I mean, it used to be like I think it was like a 40-60 split at one point. That's hard to imagine now, but between PvP and PvE. And that, of course, has dropped significantly. But the reality is that that percentage of people who are mostly in PvE, they're not coming over to PvP. All right, like let's just get that straight. They're not coming over to PvP, at least not long term. They may dip their toes in every once in a while, if PvP gets a weapon that is strong in PvE, such as, Tanasha's and Iron Banner probably being the most, recent example of that. But overall, they're staying in PvE because that's what they like. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's what they like. They're not coming over to PvP. And so you have one side of the population that is not coming over into our half of the game, and then on top of that, it's also not pulling in any new players from outside of Destiny. And sandbox issues aside, here's the thing. I would say the vast majority of first-person shooters that are, either PvP focused or at the very least have a PvP mode, they give their players some sort of way to fast track into PvP with at least decent equipment, right? Call of Duty, you have preset loadouts, and then from there it's just leveling up to get more weapons and then using those weapons to unlock attachments and until you can figure out what you like or, whatever the meta is in that game. Or even like I was talking about in, 2042, they actually, for newer players, so that they have a place where they can, very quickly level up and acquire, new weapons, new gadgets, as well as level up those weapons and even vehicles, they have a bots mode where people can do all that so that they also have a way to learn the maps and acquire better gear, right? And then, of course, you have games like, say, Halo, where there isn't really any of that because there's just weapons, scattered throughout the map and people are fighting over the different weapons that are placed throughout the map. But Destiny doesn't have any of that. And so here's the thing. If someone who does like PvP shooters came to me and they were interested in Destiny 2 PvP, and they asked me, what do I need to do to get into Destiny? And keep in mind, I'm talking about someone who wants to get into PvP specifically. If I'm going to be honest with them, I have to tell them, well, to just have a competitive loadout right? Keeping in mind, trying to get, at least a 4 out of 5 on your weapons, having good, strong rolls on your armor, and having multiple pieces of exotic armor and everything for each class. And then on top of that, things like, having to complete various campaigns to get, whatever subclasses and all that, and then having to do the side quests after that to get all the fragments and aspects for those subclasses. Between all that, and then just praying that RNG is even sort of on your side with drops for legendary armor, exotic armor, legendary weapons, so on and so forth. And keeping in mind that I'm not going to be one of these morons who tells them, oh, just go in there and use whatever you want, because that's bad advice, because all that's going to happen if I tell them that is they're going to proceed to get loadout diffed match after match after match, and they'll get frustrated and quit playing. I would have to tell them that they are going to have to spend several hundred hours just to have a mostly competitive loadout. And then I'm going to have to tell them that a significant portion of that time, in fact, probably most of that time, is going to be spent inside of the PvE side of that game, just, doing the truly awful repetitive stuff that many of us are already used to, right? Such as farming raid encounters, farming dungeon encounters, running the same GM, dozens, if not hundreds of times, trying to get that perfect weapon roll, farming, legend and master lost sectors, so on and so forth. You get the idea. And then on top of all that, they just have to pray that there isn't a update of some sort, the following reset, that completely shifts the meta and makes all that work completely irrelevant, or that we have another round of what Edge of Fate is doing, which is quite frankly soft sunsetting, which makes all of that old gear and weapons they've acquired basically irrelevant. That's something that we as Destiny players, because we've been playing this game for, a decade for whatever reason, we're all used to that. But for, a new player who's interested in getting into, Crucible, if I tell them that, they are going to laugh at me as they click off of the Destiny 2 store page and go back to whatever games they're already playing. So that's the first issue, right? Is people who like PvP shooters, they're not going to want to be spending, a shitload of time inside of the PvE side of the game. They're going to want to be able to download the game and then fast track their way into PvP and jump in and start playing that side of the game immediately. And whereas other games do give you some way of doing that, Destiny just doesn't. So with Edge of Fate and the new armor system and armor sets and now the weapon tiering system, all that is about to get exponentially worse, right? Because think about it right now. Like when we talk about going for those weapon rolls, right? Inside of PvE, you get a 2 out of 5, you're good to go in most cases, right? Like, yeah, if you're one of these people who's, doing like low mans or solo raids, or you're like a Sherpa or something like that, then yeah, having that perfect, 5 out of 5 is more important. But the reality is that hardly anyone inside of the PvE side of the community is doing that. But inside of PvP, because you are fighting human opponents and not brain dead bullet sponge, decade-old AI, you need those 4 out of 5 and 5 out of 5 rolls, because you are fighting other human beings who are actively trying to kill you, and they also have those 4 out of 5 and 5 out of 5 rolls. And so you need those rolls purely to prevent yourself from getting loadout diffed. And that's just weapons. That's not even considering, armor rolls and stat spreads and all that. That's just guns. But now with the tiering system on weapons, outside of going for that 4 out of 5 and that 5 out of 5, you now also have to worry about being like a tier 4 or a tier 5. Because now, and I can't remember how they broke down the different tiers, but I know that at tier 5, everything on the weapon is enhanceable, and I mean everything. The barrel's enhanceable, the magazine's enhanceable, the third and fourth columns are enhanceable, the mods are enhanceable. I think the masterwork, as I recall, was also enhanceable, and the origin trait is also enhanceable. And then like the tier below that, I think it's like missing 1 or 2 of those things as being enhanceable, but you get the idea. If you don't want to get loadout diffed by other players, you've got to get like a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5 roll on like a tier 4 or tier 5 weapon. That's just the reality. And then you have, of course, the armor sets, right? So now it's just not trying to get a specific stat spread on a piece of armor. It's trying to get that stat spread that you want and also keep them within the, armor sets that you want, right? So the RNG side of the game is about to get infinitely worse, which is going to make it exponentially harder to try to get into PvP. And so the reality is that, quite frankly, that by itself could be enough that I could genuinely see PvP just, basically dying off, kind of like Gambit has within the next year or so. Because again, the reality is people who like PvP shooters, they just want to shoot people, man. They're not interested in having to do all that, PvE, grinding, gambling addict, slot machine nonsense. They just want to fight people, right? That's what they want. And so someone decides to try out Destiny and they find out they have to do all this other nonsense in order to just play the side of the game that they want to play without getting loadout diffed. The instant they find that out, I guarantee you they are uninstalling the game. Straight up. And then that aside, you do have the truly awful sandbox, right? So you have the special weapon uptime, the constant ability spam, the absurdity that is PvP build crafting. And while we're getting some form of the special ammo meter back, with the new stats and the way these new stats work, and again, this has all been talked about before. I'm not going to get into what each and every stat does and all that, right? But the new stats and then armor sets providing certain bonuses and, exotics getting reworked and all that. A lot of the stuff that already makes Destiny 2 Crucible a bad first-person shooter PvP experience, because it is a bad first-person shooter PvP experience. It just is. I don't even think that's up for argument. It's about to get a whole lot worse, and that will drive new players away because, again, people who like PvP first-person shooters, they want to play a PvP first-person shooter, not a PvP first-person shooter MMO hybrid. They want to play a PvP first-person shooter, meaning they're not worried about build crafting or any of that bullshit. They want their experience to come down to, who has the better shot, who has the better positioning, who has better movement, who has better, game sense, so on and so forth. And so that really, all that is why I'm just not feeling super optimistic about Edge of Fate, and granted, I understand I'm rather jaded as a PvP player, given that it feels like pretty much ever since Beyond Light dropped, PvP has just gotten burned over and over and over again. And, every once in a while, Bungie takes 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 10 steps back, right? We've seen this cycle over and over and over again. I hope I'm wrong on this. I kind of doubt it, but I really do hope I'm wrong on this because, Destiny is the only game that I have invested literally thousands and thousands of hours in. It has been my, favorite game for many years. But I just, for the first time really ever, the first time since year 1 of Destiny 2, I just haven't wanted to play it really at all. So I've been playing other games. That's why I haven't been uploading lately. I just haven't wanted to play Destiny because my side of the game, right, PvP, that side is in the shitter. It is not a fun, rewarding, or engaging experience to play. It's basically just a whole bunch of bullshit being thrown around because, for whatever reason, Bungie seems set on turning Crucible into first-person shooter Mario Kart, which probably isn't the best move because, I don't know if they've noticed, but people aren't really interested in that. I mean, think about it, right? No, I don't think really anyone plays Mario Kart and then that's their main game or even a game that they spend a lot of time in. I would say pretty much everyone that I know who buys Mario Kart, they pull it out maybe a few times a year because because their homies are over and they're getting drunk and they thought drunk Mario Kart might be fun or something. But no one day to day is, sitting at work thinking about playing Mario Kart when they get home, right? And so Crucible feeling like Mario Kart first-person shooter PvP is not a good thing, and it will hurt the game. over time. I mean, it already has, right? If all that had been good for PvP, then PvP would not have been hemorrhaging players for the last like 3 years straight, right? I mean, it started getting bad with Beyond Light, but then man, it went downhill after Witchgreen released. So I'm just talking about all that because I just kind of needed to vent or rant a little bit, I guess. Because again, I'm not feeling optimistic about Edge of Fate really at all, you know. And then on top of that, it doesn't help that Rite of the Nine honestly has been pretty mid for the most part. I will say the Explorer mode, that's a great addition to the game, and I hope that that sticks around purely because, I mean, for PvE players, that's a good way to get new players into, you know, dungeons and stuff, right? Gives them a place where they can kind of learn how all that works. But outside of that, there hasn't really been anything inside of like Rite of the Nine that has, you know, captured my attention as much as like say Pantheon. So overall, again, I hope I'm wrong. I hope Edge of Fate surprises us, kind of like Final Shape did. But from the perspective again of a PvP main, let me just put it like this. Several years ago, right around the time of Shadowkeeper, God, I mean, even like Beyond Light, as bad as a lot of that was, if you had asked me if Destiny was a game that I would be playing 10 years from now, I would have said yes, absolutely. But now, quite frankly, it will probably be a fucking miracle if I'm still playing this game 10 months from now. And also because, quite frankly, at some point, PvP players have got to stop giving Bungie second and third and fourth and fifth chances. At some point, we just got to walk away. So we'll see what happens. Worst case scenario, quite frankly, the content that you will see on this channel will change completely. If Battlefield 6 is good, then I may pick that up as kind of our new main game for the time being, at least. And if not, then I don't know. We may consider going into like, you know, more variety type content, or something of that sort. But anyway, that's all for me today, Guardians. Y'all can let me know your thoughts in the comments, but it's not looking good, boys. But anyway, like, comment, subscribe, you know the whole deal with that. You can find my other links in the description. I'm gonna try to get back into streaming a little bit more regularly, and I do have some more Destiny related videos that'll be coming out. I will be gone for the first week of July, because I'm going on a little bit of a vacation with my fiance. But then after that, you know, we'll try to get back more into the, you know, more regular content grind. And of course, you know, when Edge of Fate drops, you know, we'll be streaming that day one. I'm probably not going to be doing the raid because, quite frankly, I just am not interested in it. But we'll give the new content a try and see how it turns out. Maybe make some predictions for where PvP is going to go and all that. But for now, I will see you on the next video. Peace.